Sit back and throw one back with a smile on your face and nostalgia on the mind as we look back on this week in pro wrestling history. But before we do, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And without further ado, let's get our wrestling nerd on. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages, it is week ending January 14th, and we're going to start off as we always do on a positive note. That's right, these are your pro wrestling birthdays. Starting off January 8th, 1947, whether you know him as a sheep herder or a bushwhacker, happy birthday to Luke Williams. 1958, the original Rey Mysterio Sr. 1968, the Joshi, known as Bull Nakano. 1982, his opponents had bad luck, that's for sure. Bad Luck Fale. And the last for January 8th, 1983, the Master Lock, Chris Masters. Our happy birthdays for January 9th, starting in 1968, the luchador legend known as Silver King. 1976, we owe him a debt of responsibility for ECW, Todd Grisham. And last but not least, for January 9th, 1991, the leader of the Riot Squad, Ruby Riott. Moving to our happy birthdays for January 10th, 1945, AWA legend, Colonel De Beers. 1951, Pistol Pez Whatley. 1970, he's got the stuff, he's buff, it's Buff Bagwell. 1972, Grandmaster Sexy, Brian Christopher. And last but not least for January 10th, happy birthday, 1978, to Tamina. January 11th, 1921, we say happy birthday to the head of the Guerrero family, Gory Guerrero. 1941, watch out for that fork, it's Abdul the Butcher. Happy birthday time for January 12th, 1954, B. Brian Blair. 1962, I wonder how she got those tattoos on her face and did they hurt? Luna Vachon. 1968, just because I love saying it, Big Dick Dudley. January 13th, 1932, we say happy birthday with respect in our hearts for quite possibly the first African-American World Heavyweight Champion, Bearcat Wright. 1950, it's one of them Hart boys, Bruce Hart. 1969, one half of the Eliminators, John Kronus. 1970, it wasn't his fault, it's Snitsky. 1981, one half of Crime Time and one amazing dad, Shad Gaspard. 1982, it's the Welchman, Mason Ryan. And our last set of birthdays for January 14th, 1954, Hacksaw Jim Duggan. 1964, somebody call his mama, it's Ernest the Cat Miller. 1986, bro, it's Matt Riddell. And last but not least, happy birthday, 1990, to Casey Cantazzaro. Of course, on the flip side of that coin, your pro wrestling deaths for week ending January 14th. January 8th, 1937, shooting legend, Farmer Burns. January 9th, 2017, one half of the tag team Well Done, Timothy Well. January 11th, 2020, Kendo Nagasaki and La Parka 2. January 12th, one of the Moondogs, 2009, Moondog Cujo. January 14th, 2014, the legendary Mae Young. Alright, enough of the sad stuff. It's time to get to the meat and potatoes. That's right, these are your pro wrestling history highlights for week ending January 14th. Jumping in the Wayback Machine and going all the way back to January 8th, 1917, where we see Waldek Zbyszko defeat B.F. Roller for the American Heavyweight title in Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania. Charlie Cutler had been recognized as champion in 1914 and began claiming the World Heavyweight title in 1915, leaving the American title vacant. Jump into 1925. Wayne Munn ends Ed Strangler Lewis's fourth reign as World Heavyweight Champion in Kansas City, Missouri. Making a leap to 1957, Ivan and Karol Kamonkoff defeat Fritz von Erich and Karl von Schruber in a tournament final to become the first Minneapolis NWA World Tag Team Champions in Minneapolis, Minnesota. The title would go on to become the AWA World Tag Team titles in 1960 when Verne Gagne left the NWA and founded the promotion. Grooving to 1966, Tim Woods defeats Mad Dog Vachon in Omaha, Nebraska to win the AWA World Heavyweight title, or so he thought. 6 days later, AWA President Stanley Blackburn declared the match a no contest after reviewing footage of the match, and returned the title to Vachon. Woods had his feet on the ropes during the pinfall. Vachon defeated Woods the same day for the title. Leaping over the 70s and going straight to 1984, Don Kernodle and Bob Orton Jr. defeat Dory Funk Jr. and Jimmy Valiant for the vacant Mid-Atlantic NWA World Tag Team titles in Charlotte, North Carolina. The title was vacated when Ricky Steamboat, who held with Jay Youngblood, announced his retirement on Christmas, ending their fifth reign. Grabbing my flannel and going to the decade of grunge, 1990. Jerry Lawler defeats King Cobra for the USWA Unified World Heavyweight title in Memphis, Tennessee, beginning his fourth reign of 5,675,000. 5 years later in 1995, Arn Anderson defeats Johnny B. Bad for the WCW World Television title for a fourth time in Atlanta, Georgia, during a live edition of The Main Event. Moving to our highlights for January 9th, starting in 1959, Pat O'Connor defeats Dick Hutton in St. Louis, Missouri to win the NWA World Heavyweight title. O'Connor was also recognized as the first AWA World Heavyweight Champion in May 1960, but was stripped of the title in August of that year for not defending against Verne Gagne. Just 3 years later in 1962, Mr. M, aka Bill Miller, defeats Verne Gagne to win the AWA World Heavyweight title in Minneapolis, Minnesota, ending Gagne's second reign. As a result, Mr. M's AWA United States title was vacated. He was also the last to hold that title, which had begun as the Chicago and Minneapolis versions of the NWA United States heavyweight title before the AWA was founded. It was held by Wilbur Snyder 4 times, twice by Gene Kiniski and Verne Gagne, and once held by Hans Schmidt, Dick the Bruiser, Hard-Boiled Haggerty, and Mr. M. Grooving to 1965, Don Leo Jonathan and Whipper Billy Watson defeat the Fabulous Kangaroos, Al Costello and Roy Heffernan, for the Winnipeg NWA International Tag Team titles in Winnipeg, Manitoba. 3 years later in 1968, Butcher Vachon and Stan Vachon defeat Enrique and Ramon Torres for the Georgia NWA World Tag Team titles in Macon, Georgia, ending the Torres' third reign. That next year in 1969, Danny Hodge and Wilbur Snyder defeat Giant Baba and Antonio Inoki for the NWA International Tag Team titles in Hiroshima, Japan, ending in Baba's and Inoki's second reign. A quick stop in the 70s, 1979. Jimmy Garvin defeats Dick Slater to win the NWA Florida Heavyweight title in Tampa, Florida. A 3-year jump to 1982, Dory Funk Jr. and Terry Funk defeat Jerry and Jack Briscoe for the NWA North American Tag Team titles in Tampa, Florida. Fast forwarding 2 years to 1984, Super Destroyer Scott Irwin wins his second world-class television title in Fort Worth, Texas, ending the second reign for Brian Addis. 5 years later in 1989, Wendell Cooley defeats Sid Vicious in Memphis, Tennessee for the championship, formerly Continental, Wrestling Association heavyweight title. The title would be awarded to Dutch Mantell later that month when Cooley left the promotion. Headbanging it into the 90s, 1995. The USWA Tag Team titles changed twice in Memphis, Tennessee. Doug Gilbert and Tommy Rich defeat PG-13, JC Ice and Wolfie D for the title, ending their fourth reign. Immediately afterwards, PG-13 won them back to begin their fifth reign. At the same show, Sweet Georgia Brown wins her second USWA Women's title, defeating Miss Jackie, aka Jackie Moore, ending her 8th reign. Our final stop for January 9th, 1997, Flash Flanagan and Steve Dunn defeat Mike Samples and Sir Mo to win the held-up USWA Tag Team titles in Memphis, Tennessee. The title was held up after a match between the teams of Flanagan and Dunn and Samples and Vic the Bruiser on December 27th in Memphis, Tennessee. Starting our highlights for January 10th in 1969, Fred Blassie defeats Bobo Brazil for the NWA America's Heavyweight title in Los Angeles, California, beginning his second reign. Staying in 1969, Don Kent defeats Dusty Rhodes in St. Joseph, Missouri for the NWA Central States Heavyweight title. Disco ducking it to 1977, Gene Knitsky defeats Don Leo Jonathan in Vancouver, British Columbia to win the Vancouver NWA Pacific Coast Heavyweight title. This ended Jonathan's 5th reign and began Knitsky's 6th. 2 years later in 1979, Tully Blanchard defeats Dale Valentine, aka Buddy Roberts, for the Southwest Championship Wrestling Southwest television title, beginning his 2nd reign. Making a quick pit stop in the 80s, 1987, the Sheep Herders, Butch Miller and Luke Williams, defeat Bad Company, Paul Diamond and Pat Tanaka, in Memphis, Tennessee for the Continental Wrestling Association International Tag Team titles. 1994, the WWF has its Monday Night Raw first anniversary show, which aired from the Richmond Coliseum in Richmond, Virginia. In one of the biggest upsets in WWE history, the 1-2-3 Kid and Marty Jannetty defeated WWF Tag Team Champions the Quebecers after a simultaneous Jannetty suplex and a crossbody from the Kid to win the titles. 2 years later in 1996, Jerry Lawler defeats Tex Slazenger for the USWA Heavyweight title in Memphis, Tennessee, ending Slazenger's 2nd reign. Also, Lady Satin, aka Debbie Combs, defeats Miss Texas, aka Jackie Moore, to win the USWA Women's title in Memphis, Tennessee, beginning Combs' 2nd reign and ending Miss Texas's 12th. 2 years, 1998, Mike Tyson and the WWF agree for Tyson to appear at March 29th's WrestleMania as a special enforcer for the event's WWF title match. Staying in 1998, ECW holds House Party 98 at the ECW Arena in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. The main event sees the Sandman pin Sabu in a Stairway to Hell match after a shot to the face with a Singapore cane, just before Sabu had Bill Alfonso shut his apparently broken jaw shut. That man is hardcore. Our final stop for January 10th, 1999. ECW holds the first annual Guilty as Charged pay-per-view before 2,600 fans at the Millennium Theater in Kissimmee, Florida. The main event sees Taz defeat ECW World Heavyweight Champion Shane Douglas by knockout to win the title, ending Douglas's 4th reign, which had lasted just over 13 months. Going all the way back to January 11th, 1901, Tom Jenkins defeats Don McLeod in Cleveland, Ohio to win the American Heavyweight title. Super fast forward to 1965, Don Leo Jonathan and Gene Knitsky defeat the Fabulous Kangaroos, Al Costello and Roy Heffernan, for the Vancouver Canadian Tag Team titles in Vancouver, British Columbia. 3 years later in 1968, Ron Etcherson and Klondike Bill defeat Bob Brown and Bob Geigel for the Central States NWA North American Tag Team title in Kansas City, Kansas, ending Brown and Geigel's 3rd reign. Disco ducking it to 1974, Mr. Wrestling 2 defeats Ron Fuller in Atlanta, Georgia to win the NWA Georgia Heavyweight title for a 3rd time. Grabbing my boombox and going to the 80s, 1981, Bruiser Brody and Kerry Von Erich win their 2nd world-class American Tag Team titles in Dallas, Texas, defeating Gino Hernandez and Gary Young. The title was vacated in May when Brody left the area. 3 years later in 1984, Mike Davis and Mike Rotunda defeat Ron Bass and the One Man Gang for the Florida NWA United States Tag Team titles in Tampa, Florida. That next year in 1985, the Midnight Express, Dennis Condrey and Bobby Eaton, defeat the Fantastics, Bobby Fulton and Tommy Rogers, to win the world-class American Tag Team titles in Dallas, Texas. Staying in 1985, Ole Anderson and Thunderbolt Patterson defeat the Long Riders, Bill and Scott Irwin, for the NWA International Tag Team titles in Columbus, Ohio. 1986, Sam Houston defeats Crusher Khrushchev to win the NWA Mid-Atlantic Heavyweight title in Atlanta, Georgia. Going to the decade that brought us snap bracelets, 1991. Ric Flair pinned NWA World Heavyweight Champion Sting to win the title and become the first WCW World Heavyweight Champion. Flair would be fired by the company on July 1st, resulting in his eventual WWF debut with the belt in tow. 2 years later in 1993, the premiere edition of WWF Monday Night Raw came live from the Manhattan Center in New York City, New York. Vince McMahon, Randy Savage, and Don Imus radio sidekick Rob Bartlett were on commentary, with Sean Mooney reporting from the outside on West 34th Street. Segments throughout the show featured Bobby Heenan, who had been replaced with Bartlett, trying to get in the building. Heenan posed as Bartlett's aunt, his uncle, and both times was busted by Mooney. Heenan was finally let into the show at the end. An interesting note, prior to Raw going on the air, Bob Backlund defeated Damien Demento, while Cheetah Ted Petty, who was working under a mask as Cheetah Kid on the Independents, defeated Johnny Rotten, aka Mike Durham. Cheetah and Rotten would begin teaming as the Public Enemy in ECW before the end of the year. Staying in 1993, in a match taped for January 16th edition of WCW Saturday Night, Dustin Rhodes defeated NWA and WCW World Tag Team Champion Ricky Steamboat by countout, after Barry Windham DDT'd Steamboat on the floor. As a result, Rhodes won the vacant NWA and WCW United States heavyweight titles, which were vacated when Rick Rude was injured in December. Our final stop in 93, Brian Christopher wins his 7th USWA heavyweight title, ending Jeff Jarrett's 6th reign in Memphis, Tennessee. At the same show, the Moondogs, Spike and Spot, defeat Ron and Don Harris for the USWA Tag Team titles, beginning their 4th reign. Final stop for January 11th, 1997. ECW holds House Party 97 at the ECW Arena in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. The main event sees Pitbull No. 1 defeat ECW World Television Champion Shane Douglas by countout. Starting off our January 12th highlights in 1951, Mars Bennett defeats Nell Stewart for the NWA Texas Women's title in Houston, Texas. 2 years later in 1953, Yvonne Robert and Whipper Billy Watson defeat Al and Tiny Mills to win the NWA Canadian Open Tag Team titles in Toronto, Ontario, Canada. Groovin' to 1968, Bobo Brazil defeats Buddy Austin for the World Wrestling Association World Heavyweight title in Los Angeles, California, ending Austin's 3rd reign and beginning Brazil's 2nd. Bobo Brazil would be the last to hold the title, as on October 1st, the WWA joined the National Wrestling Alliance and became NWA Hollywood Wrestling, recognizing NWA World Champion Gene Kiniski. Kiniski and Brazil fought to a draw for the undisputed NWA World title on December 18th in Los Angeles, California. A quick pit stop in the 70s, 1979. Twin Devil No. 1 defeats Chavo Guerrero to win the NWA America's Heavyweight title in Los Angeles, California, beginning his 2nd reign and ending Guerrero's 13th. That next year in 1980, Kevin Von Erich defeats Ox Baker for the world-class American Heavyweight title in Dallas, Texas, ending Baker's 2nd reign and beginning Von Erich's 2nd. 1981, Barry Windham defeats Dory Funk Jr. to win the NWA Florida Heavyweight title in West Palm Beach, Florida. A 6-year jump to 1987, Bob Bradley defeats the Dingo Warrior for the vacant world-class Texas Heavyweight title in Fort Worth, Texas. Staying in 1987, Jerry Blackwell defeats Goliath to win the Continental Wrestling Association Super Heavyweight title in Memphis, Tennessee. And our final stop in 87 and for January 12th, Wendell Cooley defeats Tony Anthony for the NWA Alabama Heavyweight title in Birmingham, Alabama, ending Anthony's 2nd reign and beginning Cooley's third. January 13th, 1936, Ted Christie defeats Leroy McGuirk in Hollywood, California for the World Light Heavyweight title. 1950, Danny McShane wins his fourth NWA Texas Heavyweight title, defeating Vern Gagne in Houston, Texas. Groove into 1967, Butcher and Mad Dog Vachon defeat Enrique and Ramon Torres to win the Georgia NWA World Tag Team titles in Atlanta, Georgia. Staying in 1967, Sonny Myers wins his 12th NWA Central States title, ending the third reign of Mike DiBiase in St. Joseph, Missouri. Disco ducking into 1973, Bobo Brazil defeats the Sheik in Detroit, Michigan for the Detroit NWA United States Heavyweight title, ending Sheik's third reign and beginning Brazil's sixth. A 5-year jump to 1978, Chavo and Hector Guerrero defeat Black Gordman and Goliath to win the NWA America's Tag Team titles, ending Gordman and Goliath's 16th reign. Grabbing my boombox and going to the 80s, 1986. The Fantastics, Bobby Fulton and Tommy Rogers, defeat the Sheepherders, Jonathan Boyd and Bigfoot, for the vacant AWA Southern Tag Team titles in Memphis, Tennessee. The title was vacated on December 30th when Jerry Lawler, who held the title with Austin Idol, lost a loser leaves town match to Bill Dundee. 3 years later in 1989, in the third of 6 title changes between the two men over 13 months, Chris Benoit defeats Johnny Smith to win his third Stampede British Commonwealth mid-heavyweight title, ending Smith's third reign. 1990, Chris Chavis, best known as Tatanka in the WWF, wrestles his debut match against Joe Thunderstorm for Larry Sharp's World Wrestling Alliance in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Chris was trained by Sharp at his Monster Factory Wrestling School in New Jersey. 3 years later in 1993, WCW holds its 22nd Clash of the Champions event at the Mecca Arena in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. The show aired live on TBS, earning a 2.9 rating. It was the last Clash event for Jim Ross, as he would leave shortly after for the WWF. The main event sees Cactus Jack, WCW United States Heavyweight Champion Dustin Rhodes, and Sting defeat Paul Orndorff, WCW World Heavyweight Champion Big Van Vader, and Barry Windham in a Thunder Cage match when Cactus pinned Orndorff. And our final stop for January 13th, 1996, Tommy Rich defeats Jerry Lawler in Memphis, Tennessee to win his 4th USWA heavyweight title. At the same event, PG-13, JC Ice and Wolfie D win their 10th USWA tag team titles, defeating Doug Gilbert and Tommy Rich, ending their third. Starting our January 14th highlights in 1943, Lee Wyckoff defeats Ed Strangler Lewis for the Kansas City Midwest Wrestling Association World Heavyweight title in Kansas City, Kansas, beginning his second reign. 3 years later in 1946, Ernie Peloso defeats Red Berry to win the World Light Heavyweight title in Hollywood, California, ending Berry's 7th reign. Grabbing my best pair of bell-bottoms and going to 1977. In Los Angeles, California, Dory Funk Jr. defeats Chavo Guerrero to win the NWA America's Heavyweight title, ending Guerrero's 7th reign. Staying in 1977, Mr. Wrestling and Mr. Wrestling 2 win their second NWA Georgia Tag Team titles, defeating Gene and Ole Anderson, ending their 4th reign. Grabbing my boombox again and going to the 80s, 1983. Leo Burke defeats Bret Hart in Calgary, Alberta, Canada, to win the Stampede North American Heavyweight title for an 8th time. This ended Bret's 5th and final run with the belt. Going to the decade that brought you Pogs, 1991. Arn Anderson defeats Z-Man Tom Zink for the WCW World Television title, beginning his 3rd reign. Staying in 1991, Jeff Jarrett won a tournament to become a 2-time USWA Southern Heavyweight Champion in Memphis, Tennessee, defeating Brian Lee in the finals. The title had been vacated the previous month when Eddie Gilbert left the territory. One more stop in 1991, Jerry Lynn defeats the Lightning Kid, aka Sean Waltman, for the vacant Pro Wrestling American light heavyweight title in Friedel, Minnesota, beginning his second reign. And our final stop for the week, January 14th, 1992, at a television taping in Columbus, Georgia, Ron Simmons and Big Josh, aka Matt Bourne, defeat the Young Pistols, Steve Armstrong and Tracy Smothers, for the WCW United States Tag Team titles. The match would air on the February 16th edition of WCW Main Event. Those were your short but sweet pro wrestling history highlights for week ending January 14th. I'm the eclectic gentleman Stephen Watts, and we'll see you next week.